Hi Disha. Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Can anybody tell me I'm audible? My voice is clear because I've been having some issues with the audio. So if anybody can tell me if my audio is clear in the chat. Hi Disha. Hi Amol. Could join. Okay, great. Yes, I'll just wait for a minute. Let's see who else joins and then we'll start. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Hello. Great. I think we can start. So, welcome all of you to another session on Wildlife Weekly with Nikhil. Before we start, I think I have a good news for all of those who have subscribed to my Instagram page. Those who want to watch my earlier videos who are on Instagram, you can watch on IGTV. But those who are not, your friends, relatives, colleagues, family members, anybody who is not on Instagram, and if you want to share these live chats on with them, I have a YouTube channel now by the same name, Wildlife Weekly with Nikhil, and also a Facebook page by the name Wildlife Weekly with Nikhil, where you can watch these videos. So if you want to watch all my previous discussions on variety of topics, please do go to my YouTube channel, watch those videos and subscribe it so that you'll be able to watch all the other videos that are going to come. So welcome once again to today's session, and the topic that I had put on the poster especially was and conservation. The reason for that is because especially in India, people are currently more concerned with purely taxonomy, that is just identifying what species are there. We are still working on, but there are people like our speaker today who have been working on their conservation, which is something not heard of every day. You don't hear these things related to especially conservation of frogs and snakes. Here in India especially, we usually talk about, say, tigers, leopards, or some critically endangered birds like vultures or bustards. But when it comes to frogs and snakes, people are still trying to understand what species are there, their distribution. And one news that I had shared a couple of days back on the same page related to a frog, which is now declared as a flagship species for conservation in southern parts of India. That is, it is going to be studied, its requirements are going to be studied, and then they'll decide on the conservation plan. That news was a trigger for this live, I would say. But what goes into conservation of frogs, snakes, all these things which are currently not really happening in India, or I would say which are starting in India. We have someone with us today who will be sharing his experience and a lot of work that he has done, and basically will get to know about what goes into this conservation, especially of herpetofauna. So I'll add today's speaker to the chat. Hello Matt.
Hello, Nikhil. Hello, everybody.
Great, you're audible. So,
Very good.
to everybody, to introduce Matt, I know it's a long introduction and I really have to read it, but I'll quickly run through it. Matt is actually, as had put on the poster, is a curator of herpetology at Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust and the Jersey Zoo, which is situated, if I'm not wrong, near the France. It's a small island, Jersey. And Durrell Zoo is actually pretty famous in the world if anybody of you has been following the work in herpetology, especially. He has worked for almost 20 years, especially on captive husbandry programs for frogs and snakes. And especially in zoo environment. So he's dealing with all those things in zoo, but also along with that, he's been doing a lot of field research related to conservation. And those details I would love Matt to tell us. But he's also a member of Amphibia Specialist Group and Iguana Specialist Group. So if anybody who has heard of IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which actually decides the threatened status of animals and their need for conservation. So Matt is currently a member of two of those groups, specialist groups, the iguanas and amphibians, and also a member of Amphibia ARC. And he's also taxon TAG member of European Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So he's been working, as I mentioned, for past 20 years, and it has gotten him to this stage where he can now do a lot of consultation and do a lot of work. So welcome, Matt, to today's live chat.
Thank you, Nikhil.
Yes, and to start off today's session, can you quickly tell us 20 years, it's a long time to be working in herpetofauna and their conservation. So you must have done a lot of things. But my first question would be, what triggered you towards this field, especially why frogs and snakes and their conservation? And in short, if you could tell us what type of work that you are currently doing.
Yeah, well, what brought me to reptiles and amphibians, I have to go way back. I mean, this has nothing to do with those 20 years I'm actually professionally working in it. It started when I was a little boy, to be honest. I lived in a little town in Germany. I grew up there on the border of the town. So I was always with my friends outside in the forest and, you know, in the woods and building little huts and catching frogs and fish and whatnot. Anyway, so typical youth where you kind of, you know, have animals and nature around you. And then, you know, obviously, yeah, there was a cat, and then there was, you know, I had some mice and hamsters, but yeah, I started to, you know, be interested in keeping small animals at home as well as pets, but never kind of a dog or a cat in the house. And it really was what interested me, and I think why I was getting into reptiles and amphibian mainly was that nobody else did. So right. I wanted just to, you know, do something that, you know, everybody had a cat and everybody then had a, you know, had I don't know, rabbits or whatever. So why would I need to have some? So I got out tadpoles and see what happened. And that really persisted. So I got stuck with reptiles and amphibians, I think mainly because yeah, it was something different, and it was something you could always find out something new. Exactly. And nowadays, you know, I mean, 30, 40 years onwards, we know so much more about reptiles and amphibians, but relatively speaking, it's still a field much unexplored. So what I do on a daily basis, you know, there's so many new things you can find out, and that is really the exciting bit. Exactly. It's also important, of course, because, you know, we need to know these things. But personally, for me, I think it was the thing that, yeah, it was always something new, something interesting, something that was a little bit more quirky.
Yeah, so coming to the second part of the question, what type of work you are currently doing? Because I purposely refrained myself from talking about the type of work you're doing. So I would like you to tell us about what different type of work you're doing at Durrell and at Jersey.
Yeah, so Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust is an NGO, a conservation NGO here in Jersey. And we have conservation projects all around the world for birds, for mammals, for reptiles, for amphibians. And we also, at our headquarters here in Jersey, we have a zoo, a normal zoo. It's not the biggest zoo, so we don't have much hoof stock, but we have quite a large number of animals as species, and we kind of tend to focus displaying those species we work with in the field, if at all possible. Okay. So that kind of sets us a little bit apart. And my work involves, as curator for reptiles and amphibians, for herpetology, it involves, yeah, about, I would say, 50 to 75% of my time is managing the zoo collection, managing the reptile amphibian staff. Right. And then depending on, sometimes up to half of my time, is dedicated to our conservation projects, where I either carry them out myself, go into the Caribbean, go into Mauritius, Madagascar, where we work with reptiles, amphibians, or advising my colleagues, doing some research, whether field-based or office-based here in the zoo. And well, yeah, finally, where we are, our organization is really unique, is bringing zoo work and conservation work in the field together. So this is something we do very uniquely and for a very long time on a very high level. That is, we keep species in the zoo, sometimes on display, but sometimes they're just not displayable because they're nocturnal or too small or too sensitive. Then we keep them behind the scenes and we breed them, we research them in the zoo to benefit our conservation projects in the field. One example would be we breed, we take, like, say, what we did, I think we come to that as well. We bring a small number of species into the zoo, we breed them up to 150, 200 number, and then release them back into the wild. Or we find out things about, we need to know their biology more to be able to work in the field effectively. And some species you can't research in the field because they live subterranean lifestyles, nocturnal, and this is something we can research in the zoo.
Right. So just taking this point only forward, if you could tell us a couple of projects that you have done, maybe say the snakes and Caribbean, or the Montserrat mountain chicken frog, especially. If you could just tell us what were those scenarios, why you were involved, and how that project happened and ended in the end for you. So if you could just
let's take maybe those two, a reptile and an amphibian. Let's start with the amphibian, maybe the mountain chicken frog. It's a it's a funny name. It lives in the mountains. I think maybe the call is related to maybe a chicken call, which is not quite true, but it was also eaten in the past by the local people in the Caribbean. So maybe it tastes like chicken. So mountain chicken. It was a traditional dish, and you might have noticed I say it was because it's extinct in the wild, pretty much. It occurred hundreds of years ago throughout the Lesser Antilles, quite a large number of islands in the Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean. But over the last 200-300 years, it was only present in Montserrat and Dominica.
Okay.
2 islands there. And then, I don't know how much your audience knows about the chytrid fungus, but this fungus disease is really going around the world since about 15-20 years, decimating amphibian populations everywhere, nearly everywhere. And it turned out the mountain chicken frog is highly susceptible to it. It is up to 1 kilo large frog, so it's about half this, nearly the size of my head. It's the size of a
bullfrog that we find in India.
It is, it is really one of the largest frogs, amphibians actually in the world. And in Montserrat, we got involved way before anybody knew about the chytrid fungus. It was in 1998 because on Montserrat, they have a volcano, an active volcano, and that blew up, and it destroyed half of the island. So, everybody got evacuated, had to flee, and so on. But the mountain chicken frog is on that island the largest land vertebrate. And as I said, it had a very high traditional value in terms of food. The locals were, government and lay people likewise, were concerned about, after the volcano outbreak, how it affected the whole island, because half of the habitat was destroyed, not just for people, but also for the frog.
Definitely.
So they contacted us what we could do. And short story, we started to join officially there to research the frog, which is something very peculiar because everybody knew that frog reproduces very differently to others. Nobody ever saw any tadpoles or juvenile frogs or where they lay their eggs, because they wouldn't lay the eggs in water bodies like most frogs do. So that was the first thing. We were allowed to take some frogs into captivity. And what we found out is they lay a foam nest underground, quite deep, and so that could never have been observed in Montserrat in the wild. We gave them artificial tunnels artificial underground burrows with plastic tubes and all that, and put little remote infrared cameras in them underground. So we could record what's going on in there. And what we found out was highly spectacular, because it's the first time that has ever been recorded. Those frogs lay only about between 20 and 70 eggs into that foam nest. A frog,
Exactly.
that size, you would expect they lay at least 20,000 eggs, right?
Definitely.
No, less than 100. They put that, the tadpoles hatch, they stay in that foam. The female and the male guard the nest. So if I went there in the enclosure, when there are tadpoles in the nest, the frogs would jump at me, trying to chase me away, hissing, biting. Amazing, amazing. Never seen something like that before. And about twice a week, the female sits at night on this foam in amongst the tadpoles, and she releases eggs, infertilized eggs.
Oh.
And the tadpoles eat those eggs straight away from her cloaca. So she takes them out. The tadpoles swim up to her stimulator, got very long tail, and then eat those eggs. And you can actually, they're transparent, those tadpoles. I mean, they grow up to about that size.
That's big.
And you can actually see those eggs in the stomach, in the belly of the tadpoles. And you can then, that's what we did at the beginning. We actually counted those eggs every few days in the tadpoles' bellies after each feeding event. And it turns out, over that whole reproductive thing, she actually produces about 25,000 eggs, as you would expect. But only about 70, maximum 70 are fertilized, and the rest is all food eggs.
Exactly.
So this was really something new. And so in terms of advice then for Montserrat, it was really very important, because we could say, listen, if you have a very diminished habitat now, a diminished population of frogs. If you keep hunting them all year round, it's not sustainable, because if in the breeding season you hunt the female,
True.
The whole next generation is gone as well, right? So this was really important. But then chytrid fungus arrived in 2009, and within a year, every frog was dead.
Wow.
Nothing.
All natural population.
On Montserrat, it is extinct. What we managed was we were able to take 50 animals out from the last 2 remaining streams that were unaffected by the fungus then. Now it's gone. But so we took them out, distributed them amongst 4 different zoos here in Europe, including Jersey. And we keep them in biosecure conditions, so not mixing them with all our other animals there. And we breed them for reintroduction. So we did, over the last few years, quite a number of releases of bred frogs, zoo-bred frogs, to Montserrat, to study them more in the wild with the disease, whether they can cope with the disease. We did some treatments in the field, some experiments, and it didn't quite work. And what we now did was, last year it started fully, is we put some enclosures into the forest, so fenced areas in the forest, 20 by 40 meters, 2 enclosures, and we modified the habitat a little bit. So we cut some of the canopy that sun can penetrate more, that it gets hotter and drier, and we also installed some ponds with solar heating, because we know that the chytrid fungus dies at temperatures over about 29 degrees. So we heat those ponds, even at night, to about 31 degrees. And we wanted to see whether we release frogs in those enclosures, can they treat themselves? So they would get chytrid fungus on their skin in the day from the environment. If they now at night go in those hot ponds, could they kind of kill the fungus in their skin and survive? And at the moment, it looks really quite promising. So we have had infected frogs, so we regularly test them, but none of them died yet. And very excitedly, since 4 weeks ago, we had the first tadpoles, and about a week ago, the first metamorphs hatched. So for the very first time since 2008, we had 40 offspring frogs in Montserrat. And the whole island they're nearly crying for joy. It's amazing. And this is something, this is really a fun and effective project if you have the whole island behind you. Because it's not something we went there, oh, we want to save your frog, can we get some frogs? No, they ask us, they want us to save that species for them. That makes all the difference.
Exactly. So this was a really very interesting case. I think you also worked on snakes when you are, especially in the last, I think, 10 years. So if you can tell us another interesting case regarding snakes, how you worked on there, maybe the introduction, maybe captive breeding program, and anything else, if you can tell any interesting story of a snake, especially.
Yeah. I mean, let me tell you one very brief success story and then go from there. So the very first one, and that was just a few years before I started actually in Jersey, was with the Antiguan racer. Again, a Caribbean, Lesser Antillean species of snake. The biggest one ever recorded is actually, I found it together with my colleague Nick Cole in 2013. That was 128 centimeters long, so not a very big snake. Especially for the Indian audience, you go like, what? But in the Caribbean, it's a big snake. Okay. Anyway, and this species only lived on Antigua. Again, extinct because of what is one of the biggest conservation threats, especially in the Caribbean, but also worldwide: introduced predators, introduced species, cats, rats. The Indian mongoose, introduced into the West Indies, the Caribbean, right? Long time ago to counter the rat problem. Okay. So the first settlers, planted sugarcane and all that, inevitably brought rats on the boats. Rats destroy sugarcane, big problem. Oh, what do? We bring mongoose because apparently they eat rats, the Indians say.
Right.
Now, in India, that is, maybe true because you have rats that live in the day and at night. In the Caribbean, they only live in the day, unfortunately. So the mongoose, at night, but not the mongoose hunt during the day. So they never caught the rats, but they catch everything else, right? I mean, mongoose, they eat anything. And the Caribbean reptile amphibians, all got munched away, including the Antiguan racer. But there was some offshore islands, tiny little offshore islands off Antigua. And we found, a handful of snakes there. And with really, and this is something we do everywhere in the Caribbean, in Mauritius, predator control, invasive predator eradications is really, it's sometimes not nice because you have to obviously catch and dispatch, rats, mongoose, cats, but it is the only thing you can do to actually save ecosystems, right? Because if we go out and say, oh, we want to save this and that species, then this is not because we like that species particularly. We might, and usually we do because it's fun. But actually what we want to save is the ecosystem with all its components. Because if those components are missing, your ecosystem goes down, and eventually, if that, gets broader, then it affects people as well. But with keeping offshore islands free of predators, with very regular, every 2 weeks, you go there, you do surveys, you have bait stations, you have lots of people, you can keep those islands free. And then over time, you can reduce this to every month or every 2 months controls. But that sparked the breeding of those snakes, and then we could translocate them over the next 15 years to 3-4 other islands. And now we have, it used to be the rarest snake in the world.
Wow. Okay.
No doubt. There was like 40 animals left or something like that. Now we should have about 2,500 now. But this was probably our first snake species in the Caribbean we worked with, and taking this experience, the success, and also that other Caribbean nations see the success, what can be done, and trust you that you can do that. Not just us, we do this usually with partner organizations because you need more funding, more people. So we doing this the same then in a more northern island in the Lesser Antilles, Antigua, and also in St. Lucia, which is one of the largest Lesser Antillean islands, where we have now currently the rarest snake in the world. So again, we think there's about between 20 and 30 left on a tiny little island off the coast of St. Lucia. It's about, what is it, about 3 hectares large. Is that true? I think about. And we have an additional problem now. So this island is fairly secure with biosecurity and predator control, but the climate change is a big problem. We have seen over the last 10, 15 years, the climate shifting in the Caribbean extremely. The seasons are out of sync. It doesn't rain in the rain season. It rains a lot in the dry season often. And hurricanes getting stronger. So that little island where those snakes are on is getting drier and drier, and the snakes seem not to reproduce. So what we are doing currently, and this is starting, we have built it already, but we have a staff member starting mid of October. We are taking as many of those snakes off this little island. You can't find them. It's very rugged there. So you have to take 1 or 2 off, and then a few months later, maybe another one. But we want to bring 10, 20 over into a captive breeding center, which we built, and breed them there over a number of years. And what we are doing from next year on is we built a very large fenced enclosure on St. Lucia. We're talking 50 plus hectares. So a really large area. Maybe some of you have heard this is done in New Zealand. A lot of fenced areas, predator-proof, invasive-proof, and inside you eradicate foreign species and your native ecosystem goes up. So in St. Lucia, we are doing the same, and we hope this makes a good example for the Caribbean islands to have a kind of secure, big space where your native species can thrive, and then from there on you can probably then let them out and make areas bigger. So this is our first step for St. Lucia to do that. It's quite a large thing, but yeah, interesting.
It's a challenge, and I'm sure it's definitely a difficult task on your hands.
And but even if we do the captive breeding on St. Lucia, then all the techniques how to do that is developed in the zoo environment, of course. So this is how we come into the picture.
Yeah, I know, and it's great to hear that so much efforts are being taken, especially for herpetofauna and regarding their conservation. The first case we spoke about was happened because of a natural calamity, say volcano. Second case we just spoke about was maybe by introduction of some invasive species. But one very interesting case that happened a year ago was in Mauritius, where because of oil spill, maybe you can talk to us about that, what happened and what action you took in that case particularly. If you could tell us more about that particular case.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite project actually. Well, it's many projects, but all in Mauritius. So in Mauritius, we work since over 35 years now. Wow. But the interesting bit about, we have bird projects there, but mainly reptile projects actually, because the particularity about Mauritius is that their ecosystem, the Mauritian ecosystem, is very much reptile based. So they never had big, mammals that take care of the grazing. So there's no deer and stuff like that. Tortoises were there to graze, right? There were never, big mice or shrews or rats, which would be the small prey for larger predators. That was all little skinks, little geckos, little snakes that would fill that niche. So very reptile based. And mainland Mauritius is very heavily developed in terms of, farming, agriculture, especially sugarcane. Yeah, as well. And very, very, very heavily problematic in terms of, again, predators, invasive predators. Again, the mongoose, again, the cats, the rats, but also Indian musk shrews. So obviously, there's a big Indian Mauritian connection. So there's a lot of Indian fauna. We have calotes there as well. There's the Indian wolf snake, Lycodon. There's the big big Indian Herpetofauna presence in Montserrat, but not very positive in terms of the natives because they're all really predatorial. So mainland Mauritius is really kind of, a case beyond repair, we think. But the good thing is there's a good number of fairly large offshore islands. And all of these have a particular number of species marooned there, which used to be part of the ecosystem on the native ecosystem on Mauritius. So we have all those 10, 12 islands where different species are kind of marooned, and we work with them since over 30 years,
Wow.
keeping all those islands invasive free, in restoring the native vegetation, all these kind of things. And the problem was now last year that you might have heard it, there was an oil spill in the south.
Right.
And that oil spill affected 4 of quite important but very small islands. So usually what you have an oil spill, say in Florida, where you have all the oil platforms. But anyway, you have an oil spill and it affects the beach maybe 20, 30 meters in, and then, people clean it up and leave it, and maybe 10 years later, 20 years later, it's maybe fine again, but nobody cares because 30 meters, 40 meters inland, it's fine. Now, if your islands are only like 30, 40 meters wide, then
Exactly.
there is nothing fine. It's all oiled. And that was the problem, because on those islands we had 3 species of reptiles which were quite important in our future strategy of restoring the whole ecosystems on those islands. Both on those, but also on bigger ones, because the species we had on those affected islands are genetically very distinct from the northern islands, which were not affected by oil. But we need those genes, because even though that species is still present elsewhere on the northern islands, we need a very big genetic diversity to, have them adapting to climate change, food changes over the next 100 years. So we needed those genes. We couldn't kind of have those die off because of the oil spill. That's why we took 30 animals of those species each. And unfortunately, there is no capacity in Mauritius to captive house them, to do the husbandry, to eat, not even to breed the food for them, So we got permission from the government to ship them to Jersey. Now, this was very interesting because it was during the pandemic, lockdown both in the UK, in Jersey, and in Mauritius. So it was really.
Hi, Matt. I'm sorry, I lost your audio.
Oh. Okay, Disha, can you help me? I'm apparently without audio.
No, I think it's no, you. Yeah, I'll send you a invite again.
I'm pressing that. Okay.
Yes, now, yeah.
Can you hear me again?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, thank you. What was the last thing I said that you heard?
Yeah, you're talking about the big gene pool and all those things.
Yeah. So we could not lose the animals of those oil affected islands, because we needed urgently those very different genes of those species. Unfortunately, there's no capacity in Mauritius to keep those in captivity at all. Nobody knows, but there's one person, our colleague, who knows it, but to that quickly train enough people up and the food breeding and all that wasn't possible. So we got permission to send them to Jersey. And that was during the pandemic, where there was a lockdown in Mauritius, there was a lockdown in England, there was a lockdown in Jersey. So it was extremely difficult, but we managed. The animals came to Jersey, all survived, all healthy. We, in the meantime, while we dealing with how to bring them here, we developed new rooms, biosecure rooms here in Jersey. And we brought them in there, and it was 66 animals came in on 15th of September last year. We have now 170 in total. So they started breeding immediately. Really, really good. So while we have that safe now, we have a stud book for all those, so we know exactly which ones to pair to keep those genes alive in the best way possible, all that genetic diversity. We test them for diseases. We have a big collaboration with the University of Cardiff in the UK, who do all the genetic testing for us, so we can fingerprint each individual, so we know exactly what we are doing in terms of genetics. And we keep them in a secure number until we know we can put them back, hopefully on those islands. Nobody knows when that can be, maybe in 2 years, maybe in 20 years. It depends on how the environment down there deals with the oil. So until those residues are gone, we have to, wait.
Yeah. So just coming to the last part of discussion and where this all started for me to conduct this live. This news that came up regarding the Melanobatrachus indicus, the galaxy frog, which is now going to be at least studied from a conservation point of view. And since I have worked on frogs for more than 2.5 years, I know how challenging it is to study ecology in natural conditions. And as you rightly mentioned, before doing any reintroduction or breeding thing, when you think about the ecosystem, you need to know how this frog behaves naturally, how it breeds naturally. So how do you look at this particular news coming from India that at least now herpetofauna is being considered for conservation? So how do you look at this particular news, and what future do you see if people start taking herpetofauna that seriously up to conservation and say flagship species level?
Well, my first reaction is, God, finally. Because it's not clear for many people, but you know, those little species, they make all the difference. An ecosystem that supports tigers, that supports people, is not possible without all its little underlying key parts. And the fundamental biological, ecological principle here that everybody needs to understand is that nature has finite resources. Nature does not waste anything. Evolution does not waste anything. If something is not needed in an ecology, an ecological framework, if it's not needed, it will be sorted out by evolution. If that frog exists, it must be important, even if we don't know what it is. Simple. If somebody asks me, "Oh, why is the species so important?" It's there. It must be important. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. I don't care. I mean, you know, great. Let's find out. It would be interesting. But the proof of how it might be important is it exists, right? And that is not an ethical thing. That is just a very logical baseline principle of biology and evolution, right? So anyway, this out of the way. You know, frogs are so undervalued. We see this now. We see this all across the world, but we see also that in some areas it seems to, you know, get more appreciated. And this is really a key thing. You know, putting a small, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. It's very small, so people go like, what? No, putting that as a flagship species makes absolute sense, because and especially in the Western Ghats. Western Ghats are famous for everything, but mostly for amphibians. All right. So having a beautiful frog in the Western Ghats as a flagship species of a protected area, yes, absolutely, they're perfect. A lot of people think, oh yeah, well, a flagship species needs to be big and it needs to be fluffy. So ideally, it needs to be a furry top predator, like, you know, tigers, obviously, or pandas. But I think we underestimate the people, right? People aren't that stupid that they can only appreciate a flagship species if it's furry and big. No, the flagship species can be anything where you can put where you have a narrative that inspires people to value that thing,
basically,
right? And it starts with uniqueness and it starts with beauty, and both is there in that frog, together with rarity as well, which is an unfortunate thing, but it draws people. But you can expand that and go like, hey, frogs, especially, let's take the Indian context, frogs and snakes are so underappreciated in your country, but they are probably way more important than most other taxa that you have. Snakes eat all the rats and the mice. All your rice storage would be gone if you wouldn't have snakes, right? Same. Or let's stick to rice. You couldn't farm rice without the tadpoles of frogs, because they filter more of the water than the fish, because rice paddies are often temporary puddles. So fish usually, are not there in numbers because they have to invade during a certain time in the year. Now frogs are evolved to spawn right then. So you have all those tadpoles in the rice paddies which filter the water. This is something, and take out all the algae, right? So your rice farming wouldn't work without frogs. Mosquitoes, I mean, India has a lot of mosquitoes, like all tropical countries. But you can't imagine how many you would have without frogs and tadpoles eating the larvae or the frogs. So, absolutely fantastic news. Makes perfect sense. Is the best thing ever to start off with frogs. And you have in India, there is such a huge researched and underprotected frog diversity. So starting off like that and saying to people, hey, listen, this can actually be a flagship species, will divert, to other species as well. I think it's marvelous. I think it's really, really good.
Let's hope many other researchers, maybe are listening or maybe will watch it on YouTube later, take inspiration from the stories that you told us, that yes, these species can also be important for conservation and people can work, because still even in India, herpetofauna is still not rated as high as you maybe rate birds or mammals or maybe butterflies for that matter. People are still not so confident about taking herpetofauna to that level. But I think the success stories that you have told us, and maybe the climate change effects that we are already seeing, even currently in parts of India, it's raining really heavily. And as you mentioned, I think cyclones are increasing day by every year. I think 150% is the increase in Indian Ocean and Arabian Sea because of the temperature rise. So things are going to get complicated. But I think people like you and Darrell Conservation Trust and Jerseys, who are working worldwide, not just in Jersey Island, to save whatever is there and to make sure it goes back to its natural habitat and stays there and maybe it's saved. I think these are huge efforts when it comes to herpetofauna. And thank you, Matt, for coming in today and talking to us about these huge efforts that you have been doing for past more than 20 years. It was really interesting for our audience. And before we sign off, I would like to ask audience if they have any questions regarding the stories, interesting stories that Matt told us, or if you have any of your own questions regarding this topic today, the herpetology and its relation to conservation. If we have any questions, we have a couple of minutes to take a few questions. So if you have any, please do put it in the chat.
Yeah, before I forget and before the first questions come, thank you very much, Nikhil. It was a pleasure. Yes. Thanks for inviting me.
Let's see if we have any more questions. Okay. I think everybody just liked your session and they understood everything and they don't have any questions. But yes, guys, if you can't find any questions right now, this video will be on IGTV, and as I said, it will be on YouTube and my Facebook page. So if you ever feel after watching this video later that you want to ask question, do put it in the comments, and I am in touch with Matt. I can get answers for you regarding that question.
Sure.
But once again, thank you everybody for joining in, and thank you, Matt, for joining in today and enlightening us on this very interesting topic of herpetofauna and its conservation that you have been doing for many years. So thank you everybody, and we'll see you next week with another interesting topic related to research, hopefully. So thank you everybody. Have a great day. Good night.